A misplaced set of battle plans found wrapped around cigars changed the course of a bloody war. 14 years before the Titanic sank, a novelist wrote about a strikingly similar ship named the Titan that met a nearly identical fate. The decision to open an ancient conqueror's tomb was followed, within hours, by one of the largest military invasions in history. Number 15. The celestial omen that heralded a royal downfall. In early 1066, the skies above England and much of the world were lit up by an astonishing sight. A bright, fiery object with a long, streaming tail blazed across the heavens. People at the time didn't know it was Halley's Comet, a celestial visitor that returns roughly every 76 years. What they did see was a powerful and, to many, terrifying omen. This appearance of the comet couldn't have come at a more dramatic time for England. King Edward the Confessor had just died without a clear heir, throwing the kingdom into a succession crisis. Harold Godwinson, a powerful English nobleman, was crowned king shortly after Edward's death. But his claim to the throne was immediately challenged by William, Duke of Normandy, across the English Channel, and also by Harold Hardrada, the King of Norway. The appearance of the comet, later depicted on the Bayeux Tapestry, which chronicled these events, was widely interpreted as a sign of impending doom or great change. For King Harold Godwinson, it seemed to signal disaster. Chroniclers of the time wrote about the fear and awe it inspired. Many believed it foretold the downfall of Harold's reign, and so it proved. Later that year, Harold first had to march north to defeat the invading Norwegian army led by Harold Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Though victorious, his army was weakened. Just days later, William of Normandy landed his forces on the south coast of England. Harold rushed his tired army south to meet this new threat. On October 14, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, Harold Godwinson was killed, and his Anglo-Saxon army was defeated by William's Norman forces. William the Conqueror, as he became known, was crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066. The Norman Conquest profoundly changed England, its language, culture, aristocracy, and its relationship with continental Europe for centuries to come. The comet that blazed in the sky became an enduring symbol, a cosmic coincidence that seemed to announce one of the most significant turning points in English history. Number 14. The Unsinkable Stewardess Who Cheated Death at Sea 3 times. Violet Jessop was an ocean liner, stewardess and nurse who had a quite unbelievable knack for being on the wrong ship at the wrong time, yet somehow always surviving. Her extraordinary story involves 3 of the most famous White Star Line sister ships. Her first brush with maritime disaster came in 1911. Violet was working aboard the RMS Olympic, a luxury liner that was at the time the largest civilian liner in the world. On September 20th, 1911, while sailing off the Isle of Wight, the Olympic collided with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The collision caused significant damage to both vessels. The Olympic's hull was breached and 2 of its watertight compartments flooded, but it managed to limp back to port without sinking. Violet Jessop was on board and unharmed. Less than a year later, Violet transferred to the Olympic's brand new, even grander sister ship, the RMS Titanic. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage from Southampton, England, to New York City. Just 4 days into the journey, on the night of April 14th, the supposedly unsinkable ship struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. As the Titanic began to sink, Violet, as a stewardess, helped non-English-speaking women and children into lifeboats. She was eventually ordered into Lifeboat 16. As the boat was being lowered, an officer handed her a baby to care for. After more than 8 hours in the freezing cold, Violet and the other survivors in her lifeboat were rescued by the RMS Carpathia. She still had the baby in her arms, whose mother found her on the Carpathia. One might think these experiences would put someone off sea travel for life, but not Violet Jessop. During World War I, she served as a nurse with the British Red Cross aboard His Majesty's hospital ship Titanic. This was the third and largest of the Olympic-class liners converted for wartime service. On the morning of November 21, 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, the Titanic struck a German mine but was hit by a torpedo. The ship sank rapidly in less than an hour. Violet Jessop found herself in a lifeboat that was being sucked towards the Titanic's still-turning propellers. She and others had to jump out of the lifeboat to save themselves. She hit her head on the keel of the ship as she dived into the water, but was pulled into another lifeboat and survived. She later attributed her thick auburn hair to saving her from a more severe head injury. Despite surviving the sinking of 2 of the world's largest ships and a major collision on a third, Violet Jessop continued to work at sea until her retirement. Her remarkable survival stories made her a legend among maritime enthusiasts, a woman who experienced the terrifying reality of these major disasters and lived to tell the tales. Number 13. The Lost Cigars that revealed an army's secret plans. The American Civil War was a conflict marked by brutal battles and pivotal moments where fortune seemed to favor one side then the other. One of the most remarkable instances of sheer luck influencing the course of the war occurred in September 1862, during Confederate General Robert E. Lee's first invasion of the North. Lee, commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, had a bold plan to march into Maryland. He hoped to gain recruits, supplies, and foreign recognition for the Confederacy. To achieve his objectives, he divided his army into several parts, sending them on different routes to capture strategic locations like Harper's Ferry before reconcentrating for a push further north. He detailed these complex maneuvers in a document known as Special Order 191. Copies of this order were distributed to his commanders. Then came the unbelievable coincidence. On September 13, 1862, soldiers from the 27th Indiana Volunteer Infantry, part of the Union Army of the Potomac, under General George B. McClellan, were resting in a field near Frederick, Maryland, a site recently vacated by Confederate troops. As they settled down, Corporal Barton W. Mitchell and Sergeant John M. Bloss reportedly found a piece of paper wrapped around 3 cigars lying in the grass. This paper turned out to be a lost copy of Lee's Special Order 191, detailed Lee's entire plan, including the division of his forces and their intended movements. The order was quickly passed up the chain of command and reached General McClellan. He now had an incredible piece of intelligence, essentially Lee's entire playbook. McClellan, famously cautious, is said to have exclaimed, "Here is a paper with which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." Knowing Lee's army was scattered, McClellan had a golden opportunity to strike and destroy it piecemeal. While he didn't move as quickly or decisively as some historians believe he could have, the knowledge from Special Order 191 did galvanize him into action. It allowed him to move his forces to intercept Lee. This led directly to the Battle of Antietam on September 17, 1862, near Sharpsburg, Maryland. Antietam became the bloodiest single-day battle in American history. Though tactically inconclusive, it was a strategic victory for the Union as it forced Lee to abandon his Maryland campaign and retreat back to Virginia. Perhaps even more significantly, the Union victory at Antietam gave President Abraham Lincoln the political confidence to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which redefined the war's aims and discouraged foreign powers. A single lost document, found by chance wrapped around cigars, thus played a crucial role in shaping one of the Civil War's most important battles and its profound consequences. Number 12. The eerie parallels in the lives of two American presidents. The lives of two of America's most famous presidents, Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, are often cited for an astonishing list of apparent coincidences. While some parallels are more striking than others, and a few have been embellished over time, the sheer number of them has fascinated people for decades, turning into a kind of historical puzzle. These coincidences connect two men elected to the presidency exactly 100 years apart, who both brought youthful vigor to the office and were tragically assassinated while serving. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, and then president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946 and then president in 1960. Both men were deeply involved in civil rights issues for African Americans. Both presidents were shot on a Friday in the presence of their wives. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln limousine made by the Ford Motor Company. Both men were shot in the head from behind. Both were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson, who were Southern Democrats and had previously served in the Senate. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon B. Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. The assassins also present some curious points. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, was born in 1839, though some sources say 1838. Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated Kennedy, was born in 1939. Booth ran from a theater and was caught in a warehouse, or barn. Oswald ran from a warehouse, the Texas School Book Depository, and was caught in a theater. Both Booth and Oswald were assassinated themselves before they could be brought to trial, dying from their gunshot wounds. Lincoln's secretary, whose first name was reportedly John, though this is debated and sometimes cited as a misattribution with Kennedy having a secretary named Evelyn Lincoln, supposedly warned him not to go to the theater. Kennedy's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, reportedly warned him not to go to Dallas. While historians caution against reading too much into these parallels, emphasizing that with enough data points one can always find patterns, the list of Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences continues to capture public imagination. They don't explain the major events of their presidencies or deaths, but they add a layer of eerie, almost unsettling symmetry to two of the most pivotal and tragic chapters in American history. The enduring discussion of these coincidences itself has become a notable cultural phenomenon. Number 11. The literary giant, born and died with a cosmic visitor. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, far better known by his pen name Mark Twain, was one of America's greatest writers and humorists. His life was as colorful and extraordinary as his famous characters Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. And his birth and death were marked by a truly remarkable astronomical coincidence involving one of the most famous comets in history, Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet is a periodic comet visible from Earth approximately every 76 years. It has been observed and recorded by astronomers around the world since at least 240 BC. Mark Twain was born on November 30th, 1835, just 2 weeks after Halley's Comet had made its closest approach to Earth, dazzling observers. Comet was a spectacular sight in the skies that year. Twain grew up acutely aware of this celestial connection to his birth. He often spoke and wrote about it, especially as he got older and the comet's next return approached. He seemed to feel a deep, almost fated link to this cosmic wanderer. In 1909, knowing the comet was due to reappear the following year, Twain made a famous prediction. He is widely quoted as saying, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment." Of Mythi has said, no doubt, "Now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together." And so it happened. Mark Twain died on April 21, 1910, at the age of 74, from a heart attack. Halley's Comet had made its closest approach to the Sun, perihelion, just one day before, on April 20, 1910. It was again visible in the Earth's skies, though not as spectacularly as in 1835 for many observers. The fact that his life was perfectly bracketed by two appearances of this famous comet cemented his legendary status. It was an incredibly fitting, almost literary end for a man whose life and work had such a profound impact on American literature and culture. Coincidence didn't shape his writing directly, but it provided a poetic and memorable frame to the major event that was Mark Twain's influential life and career, adding to the mystique of this iconic American figure. Number 10. The king who met his perfect double, then met his end. King Umberto I reigned as the King of Italy from 1878 until his assassination in 1900. His reign was marked by social unrest and Italy's colonial expansion. But one of the strangest stories associated with him involves an almost unbelievable series of coincidences with a man who was, for all intents and purposes, his exact double. The encounter reportedly took place on July 28, 1900, in the city of Monza, near Milan, where the king was scheduled to attend an athletic event and award ceremony. The day before, or perhaps earlier that same day, depending on the account, King Umberto I decided to dine at a small restaurant in Monza. To his immense surprise, the owner and chef of the restaurant looked identical to him in face and build. Intrigued, the king began to speak with the restaurateur. As they talked, the similarities piled up in a truly astounding way. The man's name was also Umberto. He, like the king, was born in Turin, and on the same day, March 14, 1844, both men had married a woman named Margherita. The restaurateur had opened his establishment on the very same day that King Umberto I was crowned King of Italy. Their lives seemed to mirror each other in uncanny detail. The king was reportedly delighted by these discoveries and invited his double to attend the athletic event the next day, intending to present him publicly. The following day, July 29, 1900, King Umberto I prepared to attend the event. He was informed, however, that his doppelganger, the restaurateur, would not be able to attend. The reason was tragic. The man had been killed earlier that day in a shooting accident. The king expressed his regret upon hearing this news. Later that same evening, as King Umberto I was distributing awards at the ceremony, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci emerged from the crowd. Bresci fired several shots, and King Umberto I was struck multiple times. He died shortly afterward. King was assassinated on the very same day that his uncanny double had also met a violent end. The series of parallels between the two Umbertos, culminating in their deaths on the same day, remains one of history's most bizarre and unsettling sets of coincidences, forever linking the king's tragic end to the equally unfortunate fate of his unknown twin. The assassination itself was a major political event, throwing Italy into a period of mourning and political uncertainty. Number 9. The Strange Tale of Edgar Allan Poe's Cannibalistic Prophecy. Edgar Allan Poe, the master of macabre and mystery, wrote tales that often blurred the lines between fiction and disturbing reality. One of his works, however, seemed to cross that line in a way that even he could likely not have imagined. In 1838, Poe published his only complete novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, of Nantucket. The book is a seafaring adventure story filled with mutiny, shipwreck, starvation, and grim encounters. In one particularly harrowing section of the novel, the starving survivors of a shipwreck adrift on a dismasted brig decide they must resort to cannibalism to survive. They draw lots to determine who will be sacrificed. The unfortunate loser is a young mutineer, a former ship's boy named Richard Parker. He is killed and eaten by his crewmates. This fictional account of desperation and cannibalism was shocking enough. But nearly half a century later, in 1884, real life produced a chilling echo of Poe's dark tale. An English yacht named the Mignonette set sail from Southampton, bound for Sydney, Australia. On board were Captain Tom Dudley, Edwin Stevens, Edmund Brooks, and a 17-year-old cabin boy. The cabin boy's name was Richard Parker. During a storm in the South Atlantic, far from land, the Mignonette was struck by a massive wave and sank within minutes. The 4 crew members managed to escape into a small, flimsy lifeboat with only a few tins of turnips and no fresh water. Days turned into weeks. They caught a small turtle, which sustained them for a while. But soon they were again starving and dehydrated. The young cabin boy, Richard Parker, became ill after drinking seawater. Believing Parker was dying and that they needed to sacrifice one to save the others, Captain Dudley and Stevens made the grim decision to kill him. Brooks did not participate in the killing, but did partake of the remains. Several days later, the surviving 3 men were rescued by a German ship. Upon their return to England, they were arrested and put on trial for murder. Case R.V. Dudley and Stevens became a landmark legal precedent in English common law, establishing that necessity is not a defense to a charge of murder. The fact that the real-life victim of this tragic act of survival cannibalism at sea shared the exact same name as the fictional victim in Edgar Allan Poe's novel, published 46 years earlier, was an astounding and deeply unsettling coincidence. It added a layer of eerie prophecy to Poe's already grim narrative, forever linking his fictional creation to a real-life maritime tragedy that raised profound legal and moral questions. Number 8. The man who stared down 2 atomic suns and lived. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a young marine engineer working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. In the summer of 1945, he was in Hiroshima on a 3-month business trip. On August 6, 1945, he was preparing to leave the city with 2 colleagues. As he was walking to the shipyard, he remembered he had forgotten his hanko, a personal stamp used for signing documents, and went back to his lodgings to get it. Around 8:15 a.m., as he was walking near the industrial area, he saw a B-29 bomber fly overhead and then saw 2 small parachutes. Suddenly, the sky erupted in a blinding flash of light. This was Little Boy, the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. Yamaguchi was less than 2 miles from ground zero. The blast threw him into the air, ruptured his eardrums, temporarily blinded him, and inflicted severe burns on the left side of his upper body. Despite his injuries, he managed to find his 2 colleagues, who had also survived, and they spent the night in an air raid shelter. Determined to return home, Yamaguchi, despite his fresh and painful wounds, made his way through the devastated city to a train station the next day. He boarded a train packed with other burned and injured survivors, bound for his hometown Nagasaki. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th, and despite his horrific injuries, reported for work the following morning, August 9th. He was describing the Hiroshima blast to his disbelieving supervisor when, at 11:02 a.m., the landscape outside the window once again exploded with an almost identical blinding white light. This was Fat Man. The second atomic bomb dropped on Japan. Yamaguchi was again approximately 1.8 miles from the epicenter. This second detonation destroyed the office building he was in, but Yamaguchi, his wife, and his infant son, who were all in Nagasaki at the time, miraculously survived this second nuclear inferno, though he suffered further injuries and a high fever for over a week. Tsutomu Yamaguchi became one of perhaps a few hundred people known to have been in both cities when they were bombed, but he is the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a Niju Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person, surviving both atomic attacks. For many years, he rarely spoke of his experiences. However, in his later life, he became a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament, sharing his incredible story with the world to highlight the horrors of nuclear weapons. His survival of 2 atomic bombings is an almost statistically impossible coincidence, making him a unique witness to one of humanity's darkest chapters and a powerful symbol of the devastating human cost of nuclear war. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. Number 7. The lucky break in the clouds that launched D-Day. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, was the largest seaborne invasion in history and a pivotal turning point in World War II. The success of this massive and complex operation depended on many factors, including meticulous planning, overwhelming force, and sheer bravery. But one of the most critical and unpredictable elements was the weather. The English Channel is notorious for its volatile weather, and a major storm could have wrecked the invasion fleet or prevented air support, leading to catastrophic failure. General Dwight E. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, had provisionally set D-Day for June 5, 1944. However, as the date approached, the weather forecasts became increasingly grim. A major Atlantic storm system was moving in, bringing high winds, rough seas, and low cloud cover, conditions that would make landings nearly impossible and air operations ineffective. The decision to launch or postpone weighed heavily on Eisenhower. Postponing meant a delay of at least 2 weeks, until the tides and moonlight conditions were again favorable, which could compromise the secrecy of the operation and affect troop morale. The chief meteorologist for the Allied forces was Group Captain James Stagg of the Royal Air Force. He and his team faced immense pressure to provide an accurate forecast. On June 4, with ships already at sea, Stagg and his American counterparts identified a small temporary window of improved weather expected to develop late on June 5th and last through June 6th. It was a risky prediction. The storm front was predicted to slow down just enough to allow for a brief period of relatively calmer seas and broken clouds before another period of bad weather set in. Based on this slender hope of a meteorological gap, Eisenhower made his momentous decision late on June 4th, famously saying, "Okay, let's go." The invasion was launched on June 6th. And just as Stagg's team had predicted, the weather conditions, while far from perfect, were manageable. The seas were choppy and the cloud cover was broken, but the landings proceeded. Allied air power was able to operate, supporting the troops on the beaches. Crucially, by June 7th, the bad weather returned, just as forecast. Had the invasion been postponed for a day or two, it would have encountered even worse conditions. And had it been delayed by 2 weeks, it would have run into one of the worst channel storms in decades, which hit around June 19th. This weather window was an extraordinary coincidence of atmospheric conditions aligning just right for just long enough for the Allies to establish their foothold in Normandy. Without this fortunate break in the weather, the D-Day landings could have been a disaster, dramatically altering the course of World War II in Europe. Number 6. The moldy bread that accidentally saved millions. The discovery of penicillin, the world's first true antibiotic, revolutionized medicine, and has saved countless millions of lives since its introduction. This groundbreaking discovery, however, was not the result of a carefully planned experiment, but rather a series of fortunate accidents and a keen observation by a Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming. In September 1928, Fleming was working at St. Mary's Hospital in London. He was known to be a brilliant researcher, but also notoriously untidy in his laboratory. Before leaving for a month-long vacation, Fleming had stacked a number of Petri dishes containing cultures of Staphylococcus bacteria, which cause sore throats and boils, on a bench in a corner of his lab. When Fleming returned from his holiday, he began to sort through the pile of old cultures before sterilizing and reusing the dishes. He noticed something unusual on one of the dishes. It had been contaminated with the blue-green mold, a species of Penicillium, likely Penicillium notatum, now known as Penicillium rubens. Such contamination was common, but what caught Fleming's sharp eye was that the bacteria immediately surrounding the mold colony had been destroyed. Further away from the mold, the bacterial colonies were still flourishing. Fleming realized that the mold must be producing some substance that was killing the bacteria. He called this substance mold juice, initially, and later named it penicillin. He experimented with it and found it was effective against many types of harmful bacteria, but seemed harmless to animal cells. Despite recognizing its potential, Fleming faced challenges in isolating and purifying penicillin in large quantities, and his initial findings didn't generate huge excitement in the medical community at the time. The major event it shaped, the antibiotic revolution, took another decade, and the work of other scientists, notably Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, and Norman Heatley at Oxford University during World War II, to develop methods for mass-producing penicillin. However, it was Fleming's accidental observation of that one contaminated Petri dish, a result of a combination of his messy lab habits, a spore of mold drifting in perhaps from a lab downstairs where molds were being studied in Matchery. Without this series of coincidences, the discovery of one of the most important life-saving drugs in history might have been delayed for years, or even decades, profoundly affecting the outcome of World War II and the future of medicine. Number 5. The farmer whose homes bookended a nation's bloodiest conflict. The American Civil War, which raged from 1861 to 1865, was a brutal and gaudy period in United States history. For one man, Wilmer McLean, the war began quite literally in his front yard and ended just as literally in his front parlor. This incredible coincidence makes his story unique in the annals of that devastating conflict. In July 1861, Wilmer McLean was a 47-year-old wholesale grocer living on a farm called Yorkshire Plantation, located near Manassas, Virginia. His property was situated near a stream called Bull Run. On July 21, 1861, the first major land battle of the Civil War, the First Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas, unfolded. Confederate General P. D. Beauregard, needing a headquarters with a good view of the Union lines, commandeered McLean's house. During the battle, a Union cannonball actually crashed through McLean's kitchen fireplace while Confederate officers were eating. The battle raged across his land, turning his peaceful farm into a chaotic war zone. Understandably disturbed by having the war erupt on his doorstep and concerned for his family's safety and his business interests, he supplied sugar to the Confederate Army and was a blockade runner. McLean decided to move. He sought a quieter place, further south, away from the fighting. In the spring of 1863, he relocated his family about 120 miles south to a small, then obscure village in rural Virginia called Appomattox Courthouse. He likely hoped he had found a place so remote and insignificant that the war would never reach it. For nearly 2 years, it seemed, he had succeeded. But then came April 1865, After a long and bloody siege at Petersburg, Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was retreating westward, with Union General Ulysses S. Grant's Army of the Potomac in pursuit. Lee hoped to resupply his starving army and continue the fight, but Grant's forces cut off his escape routes near Appomattox Courthouse. On April 9, 1865, Lee realized his situation was hopeless and decided to surrender. Confederate officer Charles Marshall was sent to find a suitable location for the formal surrender meeting. He randomly knocked on the door of the first respectable-looking house he came across in the village. That house belonged to Wilmer McLean. Thus, the formal surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia, effectively ending the American Civil War, took place in the front parlor of Wilmer McLean's new home. McLean is said to have later remarked, "The war began in my front yard and ended in my front parlor." This extraordinary set of coincidences made an ordinary civilian an unwilling host to both the beginning and the end of America's deadliest conflict. Number 4. The ancient curse unleashed upon an invading army. Tamerlane, also known as Timur, was a Turco-Mongol conqueror who founded the Timurid Empire in Persia and Central Asia in the 14th century. He was a brilliant military strategist, but also known for his extreme brutality. When he died in 1405, he was interred in a magnificent mausoleum called Gur-e-Amir in Samarkand, present-day Uzbekistan. Legends and rumors of a curse protecting his tomb persisted for centuries. One inscription on his tomb reportedly read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Another more specific warning was said to be inscribed on his jade casket, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." For centuries, his tomb remained undisturbed. In June 1941, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin authorized a scientific expedition to open Tamerlane's tomb. The Soviet anthropologists, led by Mikhail Gerasimov, intended to exhume Tamerlane's remains to confirm his identity, study his physique, and perhaps even reconstruct his facial features. Despite local elders and Muslim clergy warning them of the curse and the dire consequences of disturbing the conqueror's eternal rest, the Soviet team proceeded. They opened the outer crypt on June 19, 1941. They worked for several days, and on the night of June 21st, or early morning of June 22, 1941, they finally opened Tamerlane's casket itself. Just hours later, in the pre-dawn darkness of June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive surprise invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany and its allies. It was the largest German military operation of World War II, involving millions of troops along an 1,800-mile front. The invasion plunged the Soviet Union into a brutal war that would eventually claim tens of millions of Soviet lives. Timing was, to say the least, astoundingly coincidental. An invader arguably more terrible than Tamerlane in terms of the scale of destruction and loss of life had indeed been unleashed upon the land. Some accounts suggest that Gerasimov himself, upon hearing of the invasion, recalled the curse with alarm. Tamerlane's remains were later reburied with full Islamic rites in November 1942, just before the Soviet victory at the Battle of Stalingrad, which became a major turning point in the war against Germany on the Eastern Front. Whether one believes in curses or not, the chillingly precise timing between the opening of Tamerlane's tomb and the commencement of Operation Barbarossa remains one of history's most unsettling and widely discussed coincidences, forever linking an archaeological act to the outbreak of one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Number 3. The novel that predicted the Titanic disaster with chilling accuracy. 14 years before the RMS Titanic, the unsinkable marvel of its time struck an iceberg and sank on its maiden voyage in 1912, an American writer named Morgan Robertson penned a novella with an uncannily similar plot. Robertson's fictional work, first published in 1898, was titled Futility. It told the story of a massive, luxurious British ocean liner, deemed unsinkable due to its advanced design, featuring numerous watertight compartments. This fictional ship was the largest ever built, filled with wealthy and complacent passengers. Its name was the Titan. In the novel, on a cold April night, while racing through the North Atlantic at high speed, the Titan strikes an iceberg on its starboard side and sinks. Due to a shortage of lifeboats, the ship carried only the legally required minimum, which was insufficient for its full complement of passengers and crew. There was a catastrophic loss of life. When the real-life Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, the parallels to Robertson's fictional Titan were shockingly numerous and specific, leading many to label the book as a prophecy. The similarities went beyond just the basic plot. Both ships were British-owned luxury liners, hailed as the largest and most opulent of their time, and considered virtually unsinkable due to their construction with multiple watertight compartments. The fictional Titan was described as being 800 feet long. The real Titanic was 882.5 feet long. Both ships had a similar displacement tonnage and speed capability. Titan around 25 knots, Titanic around 23 to 24 knots. Both ships sank in April in the North Atlantic after hitting an iceberg on the starboard side while traveling at high speed, around 22.5 knots for Titanic, over 20 knots for Titan. Both ships had far too few lifeboats for the number of people on board. The Titan carried as few as the law allowed, which was also true for the Titanic, leading to immense loss of life in both instances. The fictional Titan had 24 lifeboats, capable of carrying less than half of its 3,000 passengers and crew. Titanic had 20 lifeboats, also insufficient for its 2,240 people. In both stories, more than half the people on board perished, largely due to the lack of lifeboats and the speed of the sinking in icy waters. After the Titanic disaster, Robertson's book, initially titled Futility, was re-released with the new title Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, and it gained widespread attention. Robertson himself denied any clairvoyant powers, stating his story was based on his extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and maritime trends. Claimed he simply extrapolated what kind of disaster could happen to such a large, fast ship. Regardless of how he conceived the story, the sheer volume of specific, accurate details shared between his fictional account and the real-world tragedy of the Titanic remains one of history's most astonishing literary coincidences. It was as if the script for one of the 20th century's most infamous disasters had been written over a decade before it occurred. Number 2. The double dose of misfortune that killed an Archduke and started a world war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, is universally recognized as the spark that ignited World War I, but the actual event was a tragicomedy of errors and one almost unbelievable coincidence that sealed the Archduke's fate, and by extension the fate of millions. Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, a province annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, much to the anger of Serbian nationalists who wanted Bosnia to be part of a greater Serbia. A group of young Serbian nationalist conspirators, supplied by a shadowy group known as the Black Hand, planned to assassinate him during his visit. On the morning of June 28th, the Archduke's motorcade proceeded along a pre-announced route. The assassins were stationed at various points. The first attempt occurred as the cars drove along Apple Quay. One conspirator, Nedeljo Kabrinovic, threw a bomb at the Archduke's car. However, the bomb had a 10-second delay. It bounced off the folded-back convertible roof of the Archduke's car and rolled under the vehicle following behind, exploding and injuring several officers and bystanders. Kabrinovic swallowed a cyanide pill, which failed to kill him, and jumped into the Miljacka River, which was only a few inches deep, and was promptly arrested. The Archduke was unharmed but shaken. After a brief reception at the town hall where a furious Franz Ferdinand admonished the mayor, he insisted on visiting the injured officers from the bombing in the hospital. This is where the crucial coincidence occurred. It was decided to alter the planned route to the hospital to avoid the city center where other assassins might be lurking. However, no one apparently informed the driver of the Archduke's car, a Graf and stiffed, open-topped tourer, about the change of plans. As the motorcade drove back along Apple Quay, the lead car correctly turned towards the hospital, but Franz Ferdinand's driver, following the original route, mistakenly turned right onto Franz Joseph Street. General Oskar Potiorek, the governor of Bosnia, who was in the car with the royal couple, shouted at the driver, "What is this? This is the wrong way. We're supposed to go straight." The driver, realizing his error, braked and began to slowly back the car up to get back onto Apple Quay. By sheer tragic chance, one of the would-be assassins' 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip had given up after the first failed attempt and had walked to a nearby delicatessen, Moritz, Schiller's, on Franz Joseph Street. As the Archduke's car stalled or slowly reversed almost directly in front of him, less than 5 feet away, Princip seized his wholly unexpected second chance. He stepped forward, drew his pistol, and fired 2 shots. The first hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, and the second hit Sophie in the abdomen. Both died shortly thereafter. This single wrong turn, placing the Archduke directly in the path of a dejected assassin who happened to be in that exact spot at that exact moment, was the fatal coincidence. Without it, Franz Ferdinand might well have survived the day. Instead, his death set off a chain reaction of ultimatums, mobilizations, and alliances that plunged Europe into the Great War within weeks. Number 1. The twin brothers separated at birth, who lived astonishingly parallel lives. The story of the Grimm twins is one of the most famous and mind-boggling cases in the study of identical twins separated at birth, raising profound questions about genetics, environment, and the very nature of identity. Born in Ohio in 1940, identical twin brothers were adopted as infants by different working-class families. Coincidentally, both sets of adoptive parents independently named their new sons James. One became James Springer, the other James Lewis. They grew up just 40 miles apart, but had no knowledge of each other's existence for 39 years. It was James Lewis who initiated the search, and in 1979, the two Jim's were finally reunited. When they met, the similarities they discovered in their life stories went far beyond the shared first name and identical appearance. The list of parallels was simply staggering. Both Jims had a childhood dog named Toy. Both had excelled at math and woodworking in school but struggled with spelling. Both married women named Linda in their first marriages. Both later divorced their Lindis and remarried women named Betty. Both Jims had a son. James Springer named his son James Allen. James Lewis named his son James Allen. Both men were heavy smokers, preferring Salem cigarettes. Both drove the same model of light blue Chevrolet. Both worked part-time as sheriff's deputies in different Ohio towns. Both enjoyed family vacations at the same small beach in St. Pete Beach, Florida, though they never crossed paths there. Both suffered from tension headaches and were prone to gaining weight around the same time in their lives. They even had similar habits, such as a fondness for leaving love notes for their wives around the house. Both had built white, circular benches around trees in their respective backyards. The Jim twins became part of the Minnesota study of twins reared apart, led by Dr. Thomas Bouchard Jr. at the University of Minnesota. This landmark study looked at identical and fraternal twins separated early in life to assess the relative influence of heredity and environment on psychological and physiological traits. The astonishing similarities between Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, along with findings from other separated twins, provided powerful evidence for the significant role of genetics in shaping personality, behavior, and even life choices. While environment clearly plays a role, the Jim twins' story dramatically highlighted how much might be influenced by our genetic blueprint. Their case became a major event in the fields of psychology and behavioral genetics, captivating both scientists and the public, and fueling the ongoing nature versus nurture debate, by showing just how strong the pull of nature could be, even across decades of separation and different upbringings. The sheer improbability of their parallel lives makes their story one of the most unbelievable coincidences ever documented.